If you can hear the sound of my voice and you are sitting around playing skeptical about AI, can you please just delete your account? Like, get out of the game. You don't understand the game. Please get off the sidelines and start investing and building in AI. So frustrated for Australian founders and founders in second, third tier markets. Please, guys, leave the country. Go find investors who believe and understand in the frontier. And if you're an investor, get moving.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Stargate program. No, not that wormhole that sends you to other planets and other galaxies, but rather Sam Altman and Larry Ellison and SoftBank's initiative to invest $500 billion into US data centers for AI. What does it mean? Can you collect some of those dollars? Is it going to really set the US on a massive advantage? And is that investment actually already out of date? Because we're also going to talk about DeepSeek, which is the Chinese model that was created for like $8 million, pennies on the dollar. What does it mean for training moving forward? What does it mean for the billions of dollars that are being invested and for NVIDIA's sky-high valuation? And what does it mean for you? Should you build your own model, your own specialist models? And should you switch to DeepSeek immediately? We'll talk about that. And then finally, and most distressingly, we're going to talk about Elon Musk's Heil Hitler Nazi salute. Was it really what it looked like? What are the counter narratives and counterintuitive ways to read this? What does it mean for tech, for you as a founder? And how do you stand up and kind of be noticed and be heard to kind of counter some of this graceless, tactless, classless behavior by some of these leaders? All that and a lot more on this week's show, straight after the break. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right, before we get started, we're going to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact, which says if you've been listening to some of the show and getting some value, we only ask for a few things in return. Please rate us and review us in your favorite listening app. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a comment, help feed the algorithm, and tell your friends about us. It helps us grow the show, help more founders, and get better guests, better sponsors, and keep doing what we're doing. All right, with that, let's jump into it, straight into topic number one.
Let's start with an announcement from earlier last week, which was what was called Project Stargate. Donald Trump lined up with a bunch of folks, Sam Altman, Oracle,
Larry Ellison,
Masayoshi Son from SoftBank, and basically announced this massive AI data center project in Texas called Project Stargate. And the big headline number was $500 billion. So these companies said that they were going to spend $500 billion, $500 billion. That's more than the GDP of most countries, building a bunch of data centers to power advanced AI in the US. Construction has already started, so the way that Donald Trump managed to get his hands on that is questionable, but I think that's a really interesting grouping. It tells us a lot about AI, the way the big US tech companies are thinking about it, and also back to our topic from last week and the week before, Chris, how they're cozying up to Donald Trump. And so I think it's a really interesting kind of nexus on the future of AI. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you're right. This reveals a lot of interesting data points. The first is this was a going concern, more or less, but Trump managed to kind of redirect the energy, put it on his stage, and give himself credit for it. I think the way he does that is say, oh, look, we're going to help you get rid of permits and help you fast track things and give you a large platform and let you drink from the tea to the federal government. And so, he manages to capture the mind share and get them on his platform. Larry Ellison and Mosser and Sam Altman, and, apparently Microsoft is involved in some way. And yeah, as you say, this is a $500 billion commitment to roll out multiple data centers, massive AI data centers. As Jensen Huang would say, these are AI factories, right? They're going to deploy these all around the country. They're starting with $100 billion and they're aiming at $500 billion. Look, I think this is really an interesting story because only a couple of days ago, the story got derailed by DeepSeek, and we sort of wanted to tease these stories apart and talk about them separately, but it's tough to do because DeepSeek throws all this into disarray. Let's talk about what we can learn about this in isolation. Number one, Donald Trump wants to control every damn story that has meaningful dollars attached to it, or AI or crypto or whatever. Number two, Larry Ellison and Sam Altman are continuing their journey of bending the knee, kissing the ring, pick your metaphor, and playing into Donald Trump's hands and narratives. Number three, these major tech companies, investment firms, and so on, they're swinging for the fences. They believe this is going to be epically, massively game-changing for the world and for the economy. And I think that it's obvious that they're right. No dollar sign is too big, and no move is too meaningful for people to capture a piece of this.
Let me elaborate on a few of those thoughts. So first of all, I heard that, this $500 billion combined with all the other capital being raised and deployed by AI companies, by the big hyperscalers, which we mean Microsoft, Google, Oracle, etc., is more in dollar adjusted terms than it cost to put a man on the moon. So this is, the metaphor of this being a moonshot, at least from a financial point of view, is actually true. And, the payoff needs to be, I think, that big. So there's this bet going on that this is like a huge, massively important thing for the world, and that it's worth pouring these huge amounts of money into it. Now, the difference, because it's being done by private enterprise and not by the government, is that the financial payoff has to be huge, not just, one giant leap for mankind, but one giant goddamn profit for all of these companies. And so it's going to be really interesting. The faith has been kept. And as you say, we'll talk about DeepSeek in a moment. But yes, there's this sort of sense of huge amounts of money being necessary to achieve this goal and then being worth spending. And the access to the capital has been amazing. Now, let's talk about the politics of this a little bit. So like you said, there's a lot of bending the knee. I think it's funny because if you look at Donald Trump's history as a businessman, as a very successful businessman, most of what he did was brand licensing. Meaning there would be some company that is like a meat company and they would be like, hey, we want to call this Trump Meats. And he would basically sell the license and do a little bit of promotion, talk about how great Trump Meats are, but he didn't run the business, right? So basically he was putting his name on something else and it made them look good. And I feel like, wow, he's kind of replaying that playbook, except now he's the president of the United States. So this thing was happening. Just to be really clear, it was already happening. There is zero government money going into it, right? This is all funded by SoftBank and Oracle and the rest of them. Really, it has nothing to do with the change of administration at all. Trump had no involvement in this. But because now these guys are like, oh, if we call this, Trump data centers or whatever, right? If we basically make Donald Trump look like he's the one who has sponsored this thing, it makes us look good. Now, the big difference is in the past, putting the Trump name on something made you look good to customers or to a class of customers. Now, putting Trump's name on something makes you look good to Trump. But that's all you need because he's the president of the United States. So there's this very funny game where they're like, this doesn't cost us anything to let him put his imprint on this, but it buys us a huge amount of political favor. And, it's gross and sick, but just to make it clear, this is what's happening. This is not a US government initiative. This is not a Trump initiative. This is not caused by the change of regime or the change of government, but that is what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most Trump could claim is that he's sidled up to them and said, hey, you put my name on it, you give me credit for it, and I will do whatever I can to strip mine all the regulations and obligations to get this done. And so we're going to make this super, super, super easy for you. And we'll strong arm local jurisdictions and whatever and just get it done for you.
Yeah, sure. That's right. Like, obviously having the president on your side is going to make this easier, but it was going to happen anyway. Now, the other fun little sideline is we mentioned a bunch of names appearing around this thing, big luminaries in AI. There's one big luminary in AI whose name we didn't mention, and his name is Elon Musk. So after this announcement was made...
How dare you not mention Elon Musk in something big and important, Yaniv?
How dare you, right? And so this is just a fun little sideline, really. But, after the announcement, Elon tweeted saying they don't actually have $500 billion. I have it on good authority that funding is not secured and blah, blah, blah. And so, there's been a lot of speculation about when the Trump and Musk bromance starts to break apart. To be clear, it hasn't broken apart yet, but he was obviously pissed off that Trump was making his competitors look good, and Sam Altman clapped back in a fairly amusing way as well. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see especially because this thing, as I said, had nothing to do with the new administration. It was happening anyway. Elon Musk couldn't get on board it, and he is unhappy about that fact. So we'll see how that plays out.
I don't think this is a side thing. I think this continues to reveal who Elon Musk is. And I want to talk about in the third topic today about Elon's Nazi salutes, about who he really is. And there's an article I want to read from Facebook from one of his former friends. What this reveals is he is just a petulant, graceless, classless child, right? And so when there's something happening that he deems to be important, or in a field that he deems as important, he just can't leave well enough alone. He can't shut his face. And so he's just got to subtweet and direct tweet again about it, even if it means, weakening his relationship with the president of the United States. He still can't control himself. He's still got to talk out of school and talk shit. And it's just, this group of people are so thin-skinned and so transparent and so graceless. They have no class. And it's really kind of a sorry state of the world that these people are in charge.
Okay, so in this announcement about Stargate, we kind of reached this peak of AI spending, of this idea that AI is a moonshot, that you have to spend vast, vast amounts of money to achieve artificial general intelligence and to really make progress in this field. And then a couple of days later, this announcement came out from a Chinese company called DeepSeek that kind of threw a massive spanner in the works of that narrative. So Chris, set this one up.
Yeah, that's right. So look, the reason that you commit $500 billion to data centers and buying NVIDIA chips is because it typically takes hundreds and hundreds of employees, sometimes thousands of employees, billions of dollars, cutting edge GPUs and massive data centers to train these large frontier models. And so you have to build massive data centers, massive power plants and power structures, and you have to buy these massive GPUs and array them into these huge arrays in order to train these incredibly powerful technologies. Or so we thought, because as you said, Yaniv, a few days later, this tiny little Chinese firm, which pivoted from being like a hedge fund.
I don't think it's even a pivot. I think this is just a side hustle of the hedge fund.
It is a side hustle of a hedge fund with less than 20 employees, with fractions of the money, like less than 8 million, I think was the reported number. They managed to train what they call a GPT-4 class model. So if you think of, ChatGPT 4.0, this is in the same class, and in some cases, on some benchmarks, better than ChatGPT 4. And it is, considered basically a frontier model. It's up there with GPT-4 and some of the characteristics of o1, and it's open source. It was made for fractions of like pennies on the dollar, and it is putting the fear of God in the entire investment community and the US ecosystem because it's come out of nowhere. There's a lot to say about this. They developed some new algorithms. They developed some new architectures. They've developed what they call a community of experts model, where instead of it being one model, there is a kind of an arbitrage model that sends the prompt to other smaller expert models. And it is more efficient. It's able to predict multiple tokens at the same time. So it's very, very fast. It has some kind of token compression where it's able to reduce noise from the training data and improve efficiency. It's got a lot of really clever innovations. But at the same time, we have to be very, very clear that it is essentially a distillation. It essentially trained from ChatGPT and possibly Llama and others. And so this thing, everyone's sort of acting like, oh my God, the Chinese have found a way to train models for, pennies on the dollar. They have certainly found some new architectures and new interesting approaches, but it would not be possible to train this model were it not for ChatGPT and other models that spent the billions of dollars in the first place. So really, they're for the most part, this is classic Chinese playbook of stealing and copying their way to outcomes. And I just think there's not enough people talking about the fact that this is not something that stands alone, and it's not something they can replicate in terms of staying ahead of the curve towards AGI and superintelligence if some of these frontier companies, real innovators in the US, just manage to protect their IP a little better and not let them do the distillation that they're managed to do.
So you sort of taken it to the geopolitics, the fact that this is coming out of China. And I'd like to come back to that, because what you're saying is perhaps valid in that sense, but in the economics of AI, what you said is kind of irrelevant, right? Which is, of course, this is a model that, is standing on the shoulders of giants, and everybody is standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before them, right? OpenAI wouldn't have been possible without the work done at Google around transformers, and, neural networks go back to the 19th. This is not new. The point is, though, that the economics of AI have been questioned. We just talked about there being a $500 billion data center being built for this. This idea that every new model is going to be more expensive to train than the last one, and that we're talking about billions of dollars to train a frontier model, or, tens or hundreds of billions of dollars as time passes. And I think what DeepSeek have shown is that perhaps that's just not true, right? That you can train models a lot cheaper. Perhaps it's true, the first time around, you have to spend billions of dollars and then it needs to be distilled. But the economics are really problematic, because then if you're OpenAI or whatever, you've spent all this money and other people can then take what you've built and create a much cheaper model. And by the way, it wasn't just cheaper to build and train. The inference side, which is the token generation when you actually talk to it, is much cheaper too. So that business model of raising and spending hundreds of billions of dollars to be this sort of base layer of AI is coming into question. And, of course, the stock market's reacted to that pretty savagely. So OpenAI is not publicly listed, but NVIDIA shares crashed. I think at one point it was 17% or something, which actually in dollar terms, because NVIDIA is a $3 trillion company, represented the largest single day wipeout for any company ever, right? So there's just this idea that AI has to be massively capital intensive has come into question. And the idea that the profits will accrue to those who do the massive capex has come into question. And so I think that's really the most interesting part of this story.
There's a couple of counterintuitive things that need to be considered. I don't think they're being talked about enough. I think this does mean that a larger set of very powerful but small models can be developed very quickly and cheaply. Specialist models fit for purpose and uniquely qualified to do certain things. But I think that creates more training demand, more GPU demand, not less. When things become cheaper, actually demand goes up and overall absolute utilization goes up, not down. And so I think this is actually good news for NVIDIA and good news for the power companies and the data center companies and what have you. I think it's counterintuitive, but it's going to ultimately turn out to be true.
There's actually a thing called Jevons Paradox in economics, which is exactly talking about what you mentioned, and it's sort of come up a lot in this context of DeepSeek, right? Which is when a resource becomes much cheaper, the overall spending on that resource often goes up because you get so much more for your money, more bang for your buck, right? And so a classic example is oil. Oil used to be really expensive to extract.
Yes.
And so the global market for oil was quite small. When oil became much cheaper to extract and much cheaper to buy, not only was more oil consumed, but more money was spent on oil. So even though it got cheaper, the amount of money going into it went up, because a cheap thing can be used for more applications. And so that's exactly the theory here with AI, is that if AI inference in particular gets much cheaper, then there's just going to be a whole lot more usage.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And so I think this bodes very, very well for NVIDIA. We all know how shit ChatGPT 3 feels compared to ChatGPT 4 and ChatGPT 4.0. It feels like a primitive piece of junk, right? And I think O1 makes 4.0 look kind of junky. And I think O3 is going to make O1 look junky. And I think there is this incredible innovation yet to come with one general intelligence and one super intelligence, that this idea of like there's going to be tons and tons of little models everywhere and everyone's going to develop their own model. I think they're going to get smarter about protecting themselves against distillation, and they're going to get smarter about building models that are actually useful, because we know that 4.0 is actually not that good. And so building a 4.0 class model, that's like 2 generations behind. Everyone's calling it like they've managed to catch up to the latest generation. 4.0 is not the latest generation. 0.3 is the latest generation. And so these guys are already behind the curve. And I think they're going to be more distillation protection, and OpenAI is going to keep running uphill.
So just to disagree with you on this, Chris, like my understanding is that DeepSeek this week released a model called R1, which is a reasoning-based model, and that this one is actually at the same level as O1, and some people are saying even O3. So it's not actually the case that it's sort of in previous generations already. So, it's right at the cutting edge.
It, in some ways, catches up with O1, and in some cases does a little bit better. In some cases, it does a little bit worse.
Sure.
But O1 is not the state of the art. O3 is the state of the art. And in their labs, that's what they've announced. They got O3 Pro in the lab. They got O4. So yes, you can distill models from the current generation of stuff, but I think you're going to expect them to protect themselves against distillation and continue to run uphill and create models that have actual human level intelligence. Because again, we talked about this uncanny valley of cognitive responses that it's giving. I think this is going to be a blip on the radar for those 2 reasons. One is it's going to drive more NVIDIA demand, and there will be more specialist models. And we haven't seen what OpenAI can really do over the next couple of generations. And so I think this is going to be, it's not clear to me that this is like doom and gloom the way the market's reacting right now. I think it's overreacting.
I mean, to me, there's no way this is doom and gloom for AI, right? Like this is a great advancement in AI, in the economics of AI. There might be some losers from it in terms of specific businesses, but the idea that this is a bad thing that's happened for AI is bizarre, right? Because this is obviously a great advance. And like we were talking about with Jevons Paradox and so on, it means more people will be using more AI for more things because the cost is lower.
The doom and gloom I'm talking about is there's doom and gloom about NVIDIA, there's doom and gloom about OpenAI, there's doom and gloom about the idea that you need billions of dollars to develop these frontier models, and that the US hasn't got as much as an advantage as it thought it did. I think all of that is really significantly overstated. I think we've seen Chinese companies steal, borrow, copy, trail behind. They're very, very good at that.
But to me, this is not about China, right? Like DeepSeek's just one example. They've actually, they're open source too. They've published the papers. I think if it's easy and cheap to create a frontier model, then there will be lots of companies making frontier models. Frontier models become somewhat of a commodity. Now, that is good news for everybody at the application layer.
I understand, Yaniv, but what I'm saying is it's easy and cheap to create a second tier model from the former models that were susceptible to distillation. So it's not a frontier model. It is O1. O3 is the frontier, and O3 and moving forward will likely have distillation protections. And therefore, I think it's an overstatement to say suddenly that you can create frontier models from other models. Because okay. I think that's a temporary state that's going to be blipped by.
All right. But look, I'm still talking on the economics of this. I was speaking to a founder I've invested in yesterday, a friend who I really respect. He was talking about DeepSeek, and he was saying, okay, so O1 costs, this is at the API layer, $60 per million tokens. DeepSeek is $2. He said if he didn't have some free credits from Microsoft because he's accessing it through Azure, he said, if my credits were over today, I know I'm going to DeepSeek. So perhaps you're right, that OpenAI will always be a bit ahead of the curve. But if it costs 30 times as much, then the question is for a lot of people, is it worth it? And if not, then the economics of it start to collapse, right? Where OpenAI maybe just, the absolute frontier model costs 30 times more than someone who's 6 months behind. And, of course, there are applications when you need the very best. But how many of those applications exist? And how many people are going to say, this thing that's 30 times cheaper is good enough for my use case because it's really pretty bloody good. And that makes things really difficult for a company like OpenAI to invest that R&D in building that frontier model.
Yeah, so I'm not deep enough in the technology to understand this part of it, which is I'm not sure if it's cheaper because it was built more cheaply, or it's cheaper because of some of these inference time optimizations like token compression, token prediction, and team of experts architecture.
My understanding is both. It's both.
My bet is the next OpenAI models have some of this token prediction, token compression, token whatever, and they will quickly drop in price, inference time price. And so, the delta between the pricing, I think, will quickly collapse. And I think the competency of the model will continue to get much, much better. The true frontier will continue to get much, much better until I think the delta between, like, why would I go to China's DeepSeek when I could use OpenAI's actual frontier model for nearly the same price? I think that's a distinct possibility.
It's a possibility, and we'll see. But I think that at the very least, I think you are kind of acknowledging the point that people are price sensitive, and that if the prices have gone down a lot, then companies like OpenAI are going to have to lower their prices to compete. And the question is, because, the price obviously consists of two things in a sense. It is the OpEx, like how much it actually costs to serve a query, that marginal cost. And then the CapEx, really, being able to amortize the huge investment you made in training the model. And the question is, if they cut the price so aggressively, are they going to be able to recover?
Yeah, but again,
all of that
we've
massive...
talked about that. We've talked about that, though. We've talked about that. They want the price to be as low as possible. They want it to be like oxygen, and they want to be powering all cognition everywhere. So that race to the bottom in pricing, they were doing that for themselves. Whether it comes from China, it comes from another model, it comes from them cannibalizing their own features. They're already driving the price as low as they can. They released O3 Mini, which makes O1, super, the same quality as O1, but for half the price. They're doing that anyway. So, like, I'm just not convinced that all of, like, the narrative, I think, is so ass backwards. The price is going down, good, which means the overall inference is going to go up, good for NVIDIA, good for everybody. The ability to create a frontier model is gone down. No, because they didn't create a frontier model. They created a sub-frontier model, and they created it through distillation. If you create safeguards against distillation and keep running and pushing the frontier, then you no longer have a frontier anywhere near a frontier model, right, in just a 12, 24 months. So I just think this is a little, like, really, it's overhyped. It really is.
You could be right. Again, I think DeepSeek itself is overhyped. I think what it does to the AI landscape, we'll see. But let's bring this back to founders, because this is happy days. Again, like I said, I was talking to this founder yesterday. It's a 30x cost improvement. You don't have to use DeepSeek to realize that, because as you point out, Chris, this cost reduction is going to trickle out through the whole ecosystem. You've got these big players who first of all, going to try to copy a lot of that technology, right, to your point, Chris, and reduce their inference costs. They're also probably in the short term willing to take a loss on this stuff and subsidize it to gain market share. And so, if you are a founder working in AI, what you're getting is I've seen this term cost per intelligence, right? So it's basically how much you pay per token for a given level of model quality is plummeting. Right? This is like Moore's Law on steroids. You are getting so much more for your money than you did 6 months ago, 12 months ago, whether you are going to the absolute frontier or a level below, or one of these mini models, depending on your need. AI compute costs as part of your overall product development costs are going down and down. The intelligence you have access to is going up and up. That old cliche that today is the worst that AI is ever going to be is, it's continuing to have that really deep resonance for me.
You add today is the most expensive AI is ever going to be too.
Right. So this becomes really interesting. It's like you can afford to do more things with AI, build it more deeply into your application, into your development processes, everything like that. By the way, friend of the pod, Amir Shavat, he couldn't join us today, but he sent through a little quote, a post that he made on Blue Sky, where he said, ChatGPT didn't think it would lose its job to AI, did it? Which I think is very funny.
Yes. I was just also talking to a founder in Australia, and he was saying, people over here are skeptical about AI and healthcare and finance, and they're talking about, they're worried about privacy laws, and they're worried about this, and they're worried about that, and they're still, not clear of whether it's going to be worth investing in.
Yeah.
Man, guys, seriously, if you can hear the sound of my voice and you are sitting around playing skeptical about AI, can you please just delete your account? Get out of the game. You don't understand the game. Please get off the sidelines and start investing and building in AI. I just want to put that out there because I heard that today, and I was so frustrated for Australian founders and founders in second, third tier markets. Please, guys, leave the country, go find investors who believe and understand in the frontier. And if you're an investor, get moving.
Yep.
You guys are just wasting your time.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the Chinese bias and, the sort of privacy, the geopolitical concerns of DeepSeek, because I think they are both real and also overblown. So it is very clear, doesn't take a lot of scratching below the surface to find out that DeepSeek toes the CCP line on sensitive political issues or simply refuses to discuss them. For example, it will not mention the Tiananmen Square massacre as an obvious example that everyone's already tried. It also shows biases in some more subtle ways. And also the DeepSeek app, which at the time of recording was, I believe, #1 in the Apple App Store free charts, sends a whole bunch of your data to China. Their privacy policy is effectively non-existent. And so, when you talk about the sort of geopolitical, the sort of Cold War that's developing between the US and China, we've previously talked about the TikTok ban last week. This is another sort of aspect to that. And I think it's a genuine concern. Now, the reason I think it's kind of perhaps overblown is a couple of reasons. So first of all, I think, as we've been discussing, DeepSeek have now sort of demonstrated this technology. Do I think DeepSeek is going to be a major player in 12 months? Probably not, really. At the very least, Western companies or any companies that want to use a non-Chinese version of this really cheap type of intelligence will easily be able to. Secondly, even DeepSeek itself, as it is fully open sourced, including open weights. So that means in terms of the concern about sending data to China, there are already third-party hosts like Perplexity, for example, who are hosting the DeepSeek model, and you can get that DeepSeek goodness without sending your data to DeepSeek, the company. And also because the model is open source, it can be fine-tuned to remove some of those biases. So is the concern real? Is AI going to start to be part of the battleground over the definition of truth? And as that intersects with geopolitics, absolutely. Is DeepSeek this massive Trojan horse that is going to kind of destroy the West? It's actually pretty low down my list of concerns for that.
The volume, the mad rush to DeepSeek's app boggles the mind. Like everyone's talking about TikTok and then everyone rushes and gives their data to DeepSeek. It's so stupid, so profoundly stupid. But yeah, you can, you go use it in Perplexity. They host it, they cleaned it up, they make sure it's all, local and protected from the CCP is the way to go. I generally agree with you. Don't install the app, stop being an idiot. Don't give your data to China, and find a local US host. And yes, I think a lot of these innovations are going to be adopted by the frontier companies or the frontier models, and we'll move on. You mentioned if these guys are going to be around in 12 months. I don't know how much coordination they had with the Chinese government. It feels like a skunkworks project to me. I just don't know that the Chinese government would have wanted this open sourced and fully documented. Just doesn't smell like CCP to me. I would not be blown away if these guys weren't seconded into some private lab and are now working on China's, with backed by China, and their future work will be more private. That would not, I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but that would not be surprising to me.
Yeah, we'll see. I think China is going to be a serious competitor. I think saying that, they just copy and steal is not particularly incisive. I think they're a genuine competitor. And yes, of course, they're building on the work that's being done in the US, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them building,
I think it's both.
Yes, it's
no,
both.
I think it's both. They copy and steal their way to competitiveness, and they brute force their way to competitiveness.
Sure.
So
it has always been thus. Like every country going through an industrial revolution does that.
But it's not that. I also think it's, we've talked on this show multiple times about, cultural mores and what have you, right? There is a deep power distance and deference to authority, which leads to a lot of kind of tell me what to do and, and yes, sir, whatever you say. And so there is a serious structural problem there that makes it difficult for these kind of breakthroughs to happen. It just is. I've worked in the market. There's a lot of people, but a lot of deference and a lot of rule following.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. The final thing we wanted to talk about, this is mostly pure politics. So if you don't want to talk about politics, or if you don't want to listen to us talk about politics, this might be a good time to wrap up. But we have to talk about Elon Musk's gesture that he made last week, the reaction to that, and, basically where things are at in terms of, I suppose, the world's march to fascism.
I mean, I think this is about tech because these people are now they represent the technology community. It's not reflecting well on us. And so I think it's very much about understanding the culture that you're in and the people who are ostensibly representing it. Yeah, so he twice did a gesture on stage during the inauguration that looked vaguely like, or roughly like, the Nazi Heil Hitler salute. If you listen to the talk, he was talking about "my heart goes out to all of you," and then proceeded to touch his heart and throw it out into the crowd. And that might be a fig leaf cover for his gesture. It might be the media and commentators deliberately trying to misinterpret what he's doing. The problem for me was more so what followed after that, which is that he chose to not explain himself or clarify his meaning whatsoever. And this is a hallmark of Republican politics, and especially Trumpian politics from the beginning, which is you can't get canceled if you tell everyone to fuck off and basically just troll them back. And so, you don't admit you're wrong, you don't apologize, and you just stand your ground. In fact, you double down. Now, you could argue he's just doubling down because he don't give no fucks. Or you could argue he wants to be misunderstood, or he's been understood perfectly well, thank you very much, by the people he wanted to signal. I don't know, and I don't care. I just continue to find him extremely distasteful and disgusting, and I wish he would go away. Another data point along the journey.
It's been a very interesting kind of ink blot test for people. This gesture, right? Was it a Nazi salute? Wasn't it? Is it because he's autistic? All of this stuff. Now, was it a Nazi salute? I think is ultimately a fairly boring question. I think the reason it sort of has this resonance is because a lot of the things that Elon Musk and Donald Trump and all of his sort of cadre are doing are fascist. And so, I think talking about Nazis as such kind of muddies the waters because, okay, do they hate Jews or whatever? It's not the point. The point is, and, we've talked about this on the podcast before, if you cannot see the parallels between what's happening in the US at the moment and what was happening in Germany in the early 1930s, you are not paying attention. Now, I want to make it very clear because this is another thing that people get wrong. It's like nobody can predict the future. The future is unpredictable. So am I saying that we're going to end up with a situation like what happened with the Nazis in Germany? I have no idea. And guess what, listener? Neither do you. Nobody does. We're talking about the parallels of where things are at now. And I suppose we're at the sort of early 1930s. It's not the case that 1939 happened, World War II happened, and the Nazis emerged fully formed as these genocidal maniacs. No. In Germany and in Italy and in other countries in Europe, we had these fascist movements that slowly undermined existing institutions and centralized power in an authority with a personality cult. And over time, then co-opted the big corporations and the wealthiest people into this kind of self-serving regime. That's what happened. And that is what's happening in the US. Now, I hope to God, and I suspect that it won't end as badly, but that's not the point. One of the ways it doesn't end as badly is for everybody to be paying attention to what's happening and to try to resist it to a certain extent, right? And the reason this has resonance is not whether Elon Musk made a Nazi salute or not. It's because he's doing all of this other stuff, including just a couple of days after this controversy, addressing the conference of the Alternative für Deutschland, which is the current far-right party in Germany, and telling them that they need to kind of reclaim German values for Germany to be great again. And, is that a dog whistle or is that extreme carelessness? It's quite possibly extreme carelessness, but when you are that wealthy, when you have that much of a megaphone, when you are so close to government, that sort of extreme carelessness and sloppiness is just unforgivable. Same with the salute. So, if you don't want people to think you're a fascist, stop acting like a fascist, right? And stop doing things that make it seem like you are a fascist. And then the problem will go away.
I mean, isn't it enough that it's unclear? Isn't it enough that we're in the ballpark that we have to ask? I mean, isn't that enough? Like, Why do we have to, this thing drives me crazy. Like, is it a genocide or is it not a genocide? Is it enough that it's like in the ballpark? Isn't it enough? Isn't it enough that it's vaguely like a Nazi salute? That it seems reasonable that it could have been a Nazi salute because of all of the other context? Why do we have to argue fucking semantics about like, has it crossed some technical line into some boundary condition of somewhat? Isn't it just disgusting and dangerous that it is anywhere near that thing? Like, give me a break. And only these people want to argue the semantics and the hair splitting of whether it technically qualifies for a thing. If you have to argue why it technically doesn't qualify, then you're wrong. If you have to explain all of the reasons why it's not, you're in trouble. And
Yep.
and I'm so tired of the semantic games and the fig leaves and the dissembling and the obfuscation. It's just, give me a break.
That's right.
Related to this, I wanted to read this thing, some of this thing from this guy called Philip Lowe. He's a verified account on Facebook. And I thought he had some interesting observations. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's some stuff in here that I thought was interesting. He said, I've known Elon Musk at a deep level for 14 years, well before he was a household name. We used to text frequently. He'd come to my birthday party and invite me to his parties. He'd tell me everything about his women problems. As sons of highly accomplished men who married Venuses, he says, I don't know what that means, were violent and lost their fortunes and who were bullied in high school. We had a number of things in common, blah, 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 blah. We used to hang out late at night in Los Angeles. He'd visit me in San Diego. He invested in my company. He says, Elon is not a Nazi per se. He is something much better or much worse, depending on how you look at it. Nazis believe that an entire race was above everyone else. Elon believes he is above everyone else. He used to think he worked on the most important problems when I met him. He did not presume to be a technical person, but he'd be the first one to say that he lacked the expertise to understand certain data. That all happened later. Now he acts like he has all the solutions. And he goes on and he talks about all this stuff about going to Mars to maintain the light of consciousness and about free speech is BS. He knowingly feeds people to manipulate them. Everything he does is about acquiring and consolidating power. The reason he likes right-wing parties is because they're easier to control. And that's also why he gave himself $56 billion that could have gone to people doing the actual work. And this was an interesting one. And this is why he doesn't like patents, because then he'd have to put other people's names on them. Which I thought was really interesting. And then he goes on and on. When we put the link in the show notes, the point that he's making is he just wants to be in charge of all the things. He's like Anakin Skywalker in like part 3, like episode 3, where he's like, one smart person should be in charge. That's basically what he believes. That's what this guy is saying. And so, he's sitting at the right hand of the Father for now, and he's basically in charge.
Yep, it is a scary time. I think if you're not concerned about this, you're not paying attention, don't get stuck in these silly debates about Nazi salutes. Look about why it is even plausible, to your point, Chris, that these debates could happen. It is not just, left-wing people just taking an opportunity, right? This is beyond left versus right. And I think this is what's been really upsetting to me is it doesn't matter what your politics are, what you think about economic policy, even what you think about migration and so on. If you support what is going on here, then you support the dismantling of a functioning democracy and the rise of fascism. And I just don't think that ultimately is going to be in anybody's interest. So, these votes are acting very much against their own interests.
But here's the problem, Yaniv. Like, all these people will go, yeah, but they're illegal immigrants. They should get kicked out. Let's say I agree with you.
Yep.
Let's say I agree with you. There's a way to do it.
Yep.
There's a way to do it, which is not rounding them up like animals and putting them in handcuffs and sticking them into military planes. There's a way to do it with grace, with class, with empathy, with humanity, right? Let's say that you think the media is problematic because they spin their own narratives. There's a way to say that without saying they're the enemy of the people, right? There's a way to, let's say that the January 6th rioters, some of them were over prosecuted. There's a way to do that with judicial review, right? There's a way to do things with taste and judgment and class and competence that isn't saying the judicial system, if it doesn't do what I want, is corrupt. That the election, if it doesn't go my way, is corrupt. The media, if it doesn't bow to me, is corrupt. and that I am the only arbiter of truth. It's not about what they're doing or what you might be listening and saying, but I agree with the policy. It's not about the policy. It's about the structures of government and the cult of personality that gives them increasing power to do whatever they want. And so I'm so tired of the arguments of like, yeah, but those are illegal immigrants and they're by definition should be treated like criminals, but they shouldn't be treated like animals. That's the difference, right? And they're not poisoning the blood of the country. That's Hitler.
Yeah.
That's like literally quoting Hitler. Just guys, seriously, pull your head out of your ass. It's not about policy. It's about governance. It's about taste, class, and balance of power. It's so frustrating.
All right, go home, hug your kids, hug your spouse, hug your parents, do whatever you need to do to feel better. Chris, if people want to follow you, learn more about what you do,
Or send me hate mail.
I'll send you hate mail. Tell everybody your address. Where do you live?
Look, we're running out of time here. I want to say one last thing. I've had it said to me multiple times, stop criticizing these people because they're in charge. It's time to pivot. I find that so distasteful. I'm imagining these oligarchs and wealthy people and insiders sipping wine and collecting art while the country and the world burns down. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that and compromise my values. And I just implore everybody to just like, remember the cliched saying, the only thing necessary for evil men to succeed is for good people to do nothing. Don't go with the flow because there's $500 billion on the table for Stargate, or there's, millions of dollars of it. Like, guys, grow a spine and stand up to the bullshit. Seriously. Yaniv, how can people find you on the internet?
Oh, it just feels wrong now, doesn't it? I was going to say, I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a bit less boring
and less fascist,
and occasionally shouting down fascists. So yeah, if you want to connect with me there, I love getting connections from TSP listeners. So just send me a request, let me know that's where you come from, and I will accept it. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, all the social media. Follow me at Chris Saad or chrissaad.com, or subscribe to my newsletter at chrissaad.com/newsletter. Please comment where you're seeing this, where you're listening to this, where you're watching this. Let us know what you think. Try to be respectful, try to be thoughtful, and try to have a real argument. And there's some guy that keeps sharing his Coinbase wallet secret phrase. Stop doing that. It's stupid.
Okay.
All right. Catch you all in the next one.
Thanks, Chris. That was a good discussion.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.